Good afternoon. I'm Rev Dave Thompson, and I'm happy to bring you back to our Civil Human Bible study today. So I'm a civil human minister. Now what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. So in that effort, I'm trying to look at these scriptures, which is my spiritual heritage, to try to find those teachings that I feel from Jesus are universally applicable to all humans, regardless of our different faiths and our different politics and our different lifestyles. So that's what my efforts are. And today we're talking about wealth and worth. It is, I'm actually excited to get into it. So I'm just going to go ahead and jump in. Let's go ahead and read the passage. It's Matthew chapter 19, starting with verses 23 and going through verse 26. Matthew chapter 19, there we go. There we go, we found it. Then Jesus said to his disciples, "Assuredly I say to you that it is hard for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven. And again I say to you, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven." When his disciples heard this, they were exceedingly amazed, saying, "Who then can be saved?" But Jesus looked at them and said to them, "With men this is impossible, but with God all things are possible." Interesting analogies that Jesus portrays for us today. The camel going through the eye of a needle. There's actually a lot of history and culture wrapped up in that particular statement. And so people who were listening to it would have understood very clearly what Jesus is saying. And so we'll talk about that in a little bit. I want to just recap and set up what's happening right now, why Jesus and the disciples are having this discussion. So yesterday in our last study, we talked about the rich young ruler, who's this guy who comes up to Jesus and says, "Hey, I want to be a good person, and I want, to live my life in a way that follows you." So Jesus says, "Okay, well, follow the commandments. Don't do not kill, don't steal people, honor your mother and father, love your neighbor as yourself." And he says, "Well, I've done that since birth." And then Jesus says, "Okay, well, if you're serious about this, give everything that you have, put all your real estate and all your holdings up for sale, take that money and give it all to the poor, and then come and follow me." And this rich young ruler, who was super excited about following Jesus and being a student of his, all of a sudden is deeply saddened because the man had a substantial amount of wealth, it says. And we talked about the difference between why this rich young ruler was so sort of happy and excited about what he could do, because he was able to fulfill the law, this religious set of rules that Israel is governed by in this day and age, 2,000 years ago. So he was able to follow those rules and to live in the society's perspective perfect or a good life. But Jesus undercuts all that because he doesn't care about the fulfillment of the law. Although those are important, his whole purpose is, are you following the virtues or the intention of the law? And when he offers this final challenge to the rich young ruler, he says, okay, if you're truly compassionate, if you're truly humble, give everything that you have to the poor and come and follow me. And that's just wasn't what he was able to do. And in the end of it, we saw that there was people who could fulfill the law and purity and all those social customs. And then there was a whole different world of fulfilling those virtues. So today, Jesus is kind of dovetailing off of this. He's sort of turning to his disciples now that the young man has walked away. He's turned to his disciples now and said, "Hey, it's so sad. It's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than it is for a camel to go through the eye of a needle." And, you wonder what that means, right? I mean, it sounds pretty ridiculous, since obviously a camel can't go through the eye of a needle, which is like a sewing needle where you put the thread through. It's pretty tiny. So that would mean it was impossible for a rich person to be part of this kingdom that Jesus is talking about, this is society. Well, this seems pretty extreme. But if you go back in time, 2,000 years ago, and actually you can even go today to Jerusalem and find this spot, but in this day and age, there was a gate in the back of the city, or it was in a further part from the city, that was just this tiny little hole in the wall. There's no bigger than, maybe 6 feet by 3 feet at most. And so fitting a camel through there, although sure, I guess you could, you're probably going to hurt your camel and it may not get through. If anything, it's going to be incredibly difficult to get through that. So why in the world does Jesus bring this up? And the next sort of response from the disciples is kind of a key into why he's bringing this up. They were blown away. And the words here were that they were exceedingly blown away. And this actual, the word here in the Greek means to have all your senses overwhelmed. And I say blown away in the sense of, just awestruck that he would say this. But not only that, it's exceedingly awestruck. So making a point here about the fact that the disciples are aghast and can't quite figure out what Jesus is talking about. Why is that? I think that's one of the more important parts of today's study and conversation. And that is because the disciples, like many of us today, 2,000 years removed as human beings, we still tend to see people who have wealth and power as being individuals who are better or good or moral or just a quality higher than the rest of us who maybe don't have wealth. And so there's one musical called Fiddler on the Roof. It was also a movie, and there's a central character, Tevye. And Tevye is this father of a struggling family, and this is in Russia, and a Jewish family. And he has this song where he talks about if I were a rich man. And one of the phrases in it was, because when you're rich, they think you really know. And I love that because it is true, isn't it? We, even today, in our politics, for example, we look to political leaders who are wealthy. And I'm going to talk about why that is a misnomer, why that's not a good reason to judge people. Because oftentimes wealth can just be inherited. Oftentimes, as there was a recent study done, I think it was by Harvard Business School, but it showed that the general overwhelming statistics are that people who have great wealth were just in the right place at the right time. That it wasn't as much an aspect of their ability or their person being able to do more than everybody else was. It really had to do with them having the right idea in the right place in the right time. So we have, for instance, Amazon. I'll just pick on them because, hey, he's wealthy, right? The richest man in the world, not only just the richest man, but we're talking billions of dollars. That's a lot of money. Is this because Jeff Bezos, for instance, is just this miraculous person that he's supernatural or has a keen ability that nobody else in the world possesses? Absolutely not. He's a human being, had a great idea, put a lot of work in, deserves to have a reward for that. That much money? I don't know. I'll leave that up to you to decide. But the reality is here's a guy who has a super amount of wealth. Whether or not he is a moral person is really irrelevant to his money. And I want to talk about that when we approach the end here. I want to walk through just a couple of points in this text and then wrap it up on this conversation. So the disciples say to Jesus, they're aghast, they're surprised that he has just removed their idea that wealthy people are better. And so they said, well, who in the world can be saved? If the rich person can't do it, if the wealthy person has no chance of getting into the kingdom of heaven or being a part of this society, then how in the world can we expect anybody, let alone the poor, to do that? And then Jesus says this statement that with man, that is impossible, or mankind or humankind, that's impossible. But with God, all things are possible. People love to use that verse way out of context and suggest that God is willing and able to do some atrocious things. That is not what it's talking about. Right here, it's talking about the difficulty of managing wealth and of seeking after riches compared to the virtues that Jesus is teaching and the goal and compassion that is surrounding helping the needy and the poor and the sick. I grew up in a very conservative evangelical movement, Pentecostal. And whereas there were some great things about it, I loved the fact that they saw God as being somebody right here and now that was personal and could be approached in that manner. There was no, there was nothing in the way of us and God. No church, no person. We really had just direct access to consider and be a part of these virtues with God. There's a teaching, however, in the church, and it has run significantly large, especially currently, where it's what's called the prosperity gospel or the health and wealth gospel. It's this idea that being a good person, being close to God, or having a righteous life means that you're going to be rich or wealthy or have a lot of dough, basically. And in fact, I sat in on a business person's meeting. It was like a Christian business person's meeting with the church. And this was, 6,000 to 8,000 people at the time, at the first time. I think that's where it was. It was several thousand for that matter. And so I was interested to see what this pastor was going to talk about. And I was actually just thrown back by a statement that I heard him utter, and that was this. And I'm trying to quote as exactly as I can. Your bank account is directly proportional to your relationship with God. And I just could not wrap my head around where he got that and how that is at all related to the teachings of Jesus, who looks at the widow who offers a couple of pennies in offering and in help to the temple or to God, and sees her as being far more righteous and far more good of a person than one of the teachers of the law who ends up giving, thousands of dollars. That teaching continues to run through many, especially evangelical churches. I'm sorry to say, but it is true. And there are mega churches. I don't need to name names. You know who those are. They've been around for a little while. And, we're talking thousands and thousands of members. Regrettably, they have little to do with helping the poor and the sick, the lonely, the infirmed, those who are truly suffering in our society. They have more to do with fundraising and teaching people, feeding the healthy, as it were. So why is it so bad to be wealthy? What is it? Does Jesus hate wealthy people? No, absolutely not. He doesn't hate wealthy people. He's not a wealthy person. He's dependent on everybody else to provide for him. Well, and then the guy can bust out, 5,000 loaves of bread and fish if he wants to. He's evidently has that talent. But nonetheless, he's not seen as somebody who is possessing a lot. And I want to talk about it, just wrapping up here, a couple of items that to think about when it comes to wealth. One of the challenges with seeking after wealth is that it inherently turns our attention to ourselves, oftentimes. And all of these statements, I'm saying there are excuses, there are examples that are different. And I know some people who are quite wealthy, but who are very involved in society, and they've used their wealth to do good things. And they don't live lavishly. They're very humble people. And so there are those examples. But for the most part, going after wealth means that you're going to be focusing your attention on that. And that means that you're going to be focusing your attentions on yourself. Now, the lessons of Jesus, these virtues that he's talking about being the virtues that this universe is sort of operating by, that if you do these, you can be good and have a full and prosperous, not money-wise, but prosperous in the sense of feeling great about your life. I want to point out one additional thing, and that is that greed can sneak up on us. Oftentimes, we may start with the idea that we want to get more money so that we can help more people. More money, more mission, as oftentimes said in nonprofits. That's a slippery slope in some ways, because we can often continue to do that without ever getting around to actually helping the needy and the sick. Last, I just want to point out something. Money does not mean worth. It does not mean ability. Jesus was a person of very minimal wealth. He was a person who didn't clothe himself greatly or live lavishly, and yet we're talking about him 2,000 years later. He's still the focus and epicenter of a strong percentage of the world's religions. Gandhi is another case in point. He's a man who set aside all his endeavors to be a lawyer and to make money in that regard, and instead clothed himself like the common person and began to help the common people in the ways that he could. He didn't see wealth the way that we would think wealth is, Jeff Bezos ways, but the man moved a country to a place of seeking independence from the British Empire at the time. Wealth does not mean ability or strength or worth. And that's what I want to leave on today. And that's something that I had to and continue to focus on in my life, to remember that my ability to change this world, to provide impact, doesn't come by me just seeking after wealth. It comes by me looking after these virtues and finding the talents and abilities that I have, putting them to use for the good of those who are suffering, who are sick, and who are alone and desperate and truly suffering in our society. I want to thank you so much for joining me in this Bible study today. There's one more conversation tomorrow about wealth and money, and I'm excited to go to do that conversation as well. A little different take on it. And until then, I just want to say to you that I love you. And I hope you choose to love yourself. It's the only love in this world that we really have any control over. And I would invite you today to go about the rest of your day like I do, or I'm trying to do, loving our neighbors the same way. Thank you.